Night School.
Night School.
So we're going to talk about Not In It to Win It by Andy Stanley. I found this book boring. And it's, so me and Brent, who I work with, agreed to read it and then discuss it. And what interested me in the book was that Andy Stanley recommended The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt on Facebook. And I felt like since he had been reading Haidt, who I think is brilliant, and reading that book, which I thought was brilliant, I figured that his book might expand on those ideas or offer a Christian perspective on them. And instead, the book was really just about, well, it was about a couple things. So first, it was about the fact that Andy Stanley feels kind of victimized by the criticism that he's received as a pastor throughout the COVID crisis. And I can't imagine being in that position because he did have like people on both sides being like, you got to take a stand, man. Sure. And so he was extremely annoyed when he wrote this book. For the first chapter, maybe it was either the introduction or the first chapter, he was really just ranting. It was like an emotional reaction. It was like he was ranting and saying, everybody is expecting me to take a stand, and I go on the news because they ask me to go on there. I guess he shut down a little bit. Like he moved to online services a little earlier than some churches. So CNN reached out to him and was like, hey, do you want to talk about why you chose to go online? He went on CNN, and he's a church in the South, or he's a pastor in the South. So then he had people like, you're on the fake news and you're not taking a stand, and you're saying that Andy went on CNN and connected Christian theology to his decision to move to online services because he said like, this is our version of loving our neighbor is keeping people safe and doing church in a way that we don't feel is going to get anybody hurt.
Yeah.
So, one sec.
Yeah, no, that's logical.
Yeah. Man, I mean, as early as him like giving his appreciation note to his wife before the introduction, he's already ranting about how much criticism he gets. What was this line? It was so weird. Only you know the crazy that gravitates in our direction when I step out to address concerns we both agree need to be addressed. No one feels the weight of the criticism that comes my way like you do. You carry it well with dignity and grace. How many times have you taken my hand and said, if they knew you, they wouldn't say things like that about you? The best decision of my life was asking you to marry me. Everyone who knows you agrees. So most of that was about how much criticism he gets, not about how much he loves his wife, right?
Okay, yeah. And he snuck it into thanking his wife.
Right.
That's fun.
And it's funny because I think Trump was really influential to people on both sides of the political spectrum, just the way that people communicate.
Sure.
I can see Trump's influence on Tim Dillon, for example, who doesn't really have a political affiliation.
Right.
I think you can see Trump's influence on politicians. You can see Trump's influence on Biden, who like thinks that it's cool to sling mud in this childish way. Like,
yeah,
Trump
be a little edgy, say harsh stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
And harsh stuff that's like really simple and just like a playground insult. Like Trump kind of coined that pettiness, and but it doesn't work for everybody. You know, it's
That's
not
true. You have to be kind of an open scumbag in order for it to work correctly.
So it works for Tim Dillon.
It does a little bit, yeah.
Yeah, and it works for Trump, and it. But what I'm saying, the influence is here kind of is like Andy Stanley is addressing political division and specifically related to COVID, and he seems more frustrated with conservative Christianity, but that has been a greater force, I suppose, over the past couple of years. Is like people using Christian theology to be conservative rather than using Christian theology to be liberal. You can do either one. You can do whatever the hell you want with Christian theology.
Sure.
The devil uses Christian theology to try to convince Jesus to like break his focus, right?
Sure.
So it's like, yeah, you can do whatever you want with it. I think that has been a more common issue. So maybe that's why it comes off like Andy Stanley almost seems left-leaning in the book, because he's like, come on, guys, you can't like. He says at one point, this was really funny and a valid point in my opinion. He said, if you're a church that is going to be blatantly right-leaning, you should put a sign out front that says, heads up, we are an unapologetically Republican church. and so that people know what they're walking into. And if you don't know, if you don't want to do that because you think that's not the Christian thing to do, then what are you doing, man?
What?
You get what I mean?
No.
If you're a church that is unapologetically Republican, but you don't want to put a sign out front that says, heads up, we are an unapologetically Republican church, because you don't think that's a Christian thing to do.
Oh, right.
Then what the hell are you doing as a church?
Sure.
Like, so you don't want to admit that that's what you are, but you think that's what you should be.
Right. That's kind of, it's denying part of the like clear ideology of the place.
Right.
So he said that he thinks that right-leaning churches should do that?
Well, he's making a point.
Okay. But did he say that of left ones too, though?
No, he didn't say that of left ones. And that's why I'm saying he almost comes off like he has a left stance in the book.
Yeah.
But I think that's just because conservative Christianity has been crazier and more outspoken over the past few years. And I'm trying to play devil's advocate here because I think it's a stupid book and it was a bad idea to write it. And it might have done more harm than good. But he's published 20 books. And I thought Deep and Wide, this was only my second book I've read by him. Mm-hmm. I thought Deep and Wide was really good. And if you've written 20 books, one of them's probably a stupid idea. So yeah, so whatever. I'm really not trying to I'm not saying that my opinion of him as an author is negative. I'm just saying that I don't think this book was a good idea.
Right. He probably wrote this when he was being poorly socialized at home alone.
Yeah.
Like, this is when he wrote it.
Right. Let's see. What year? I think it was published last year. So he probably wrote it in like 2019, 2020.
Yeah.
Copyright 2022, but how long? It takes a little while to write a book, so...
But isn't this kind of directly about COVID? Like, doesn't it have to be written in 20?
Yeah, it's directly about COVID. And like, that's partly why it's such a bad idea, is if you're going to preach timeless... if you're going to preach Christian philosophy, if you're going to teach a Christian way of thinking and approaching the world of ideas, which politics is... you should express ideas that are timeless. You shouldn't say, like, here's how to be a Christian thinker in the year 2022. Mm-hmm. There's a timeless way to think in a manner that's grounded in the fundamental truths that were taught by Jesus.
Sure.
So if you're reacting to a certain time period's way of thinking, then you are also part of the division that is causing this problem in the church that's making... So he's repeatedly preaching about unity in this book, right? Mm-hmm. So this is... something that frustrates me about reading Christian writers in general is I feel that they are so against the idea that this universe is one, that this universe is unified, that what we're doing is trying to reintegrate with the eternal, timeless, non-dual, transcendent source that we came from, and that there's multiple ways to do that. They are so trying to avoid that because they want to maintain... Because one of their axiomatic presuppositions is that Christianity is the right religion and other religions are wrong religions. So if they embrace the fundamental unity of life, then the game ends. And that's the game that they're playing. So here's a really funny example of this. I was reading a non-dual writer. It was either Marshall Davis or Ravi Ravindra or something, because I'm working on a senior project right now. That's why I'm doing some episodes on Christianity and non-duality. I'm wrestling with these ideas because I'm doing a senior project about yoga and the gospel and methods of attaining unity with God. And somebody who I was reading last week said that the line in the book of John where Jesus says, let me find this line because it's in this book too. It's one of the most blatantly non-dual, transcendent lines in the gospel. Protect them. Yeah, so I have brought you glory on earth. Oh my gosh, let me go back. Okay, Jesus defines eternal life. No mention of heaven, just a relationship with the Father and his Son. Now this is eternal life, that they know you, the only true God, and Jesus Christ, whom you have sent. Then he points to the shared communal work. So this is Jesus. Then he points to the shared communal work that he and the Father had been working as one throughout Jesus' ministry. I have brought you glory on earth by finishing the work you gave me to do. That's Jesus quoted talking to God. I have brought you glory on earth by finishing the work you gave me to do. What was that work? To reveal what the Father was like to a handful of followers who would in turn distribute that knowledge to the world. Then Jesus asked that his work, the work of revealing the Father to the world, would continue uninterrupted through the apostles. Now Jesus says to God, "Protect them by the power of your name, the name you gave me, so that they may be one as we are one." So I was reading a non-dual commentary on the gospel, and it was saying this is one of the most blatantly non-dual lines in the gospel. Like, this is one of the quotes by Jesus where he's very directly saying that he wants people to be unified. He wants them to be one. Mm-hmm. And he doesn't say, I want them to get along. He says, I want them to be one. Mm-hmm. And so a yoga-inspired interpretation of that would be that he wants them all to receive the realization that they are fundamentally interconnected with all of being. Yeah. And that would create a paradigm where it's perfectly rational to treat other people like they are yourself, because fundamentally they are. And so Andy Stanley brings up this line, and this is how obvious it is that that line refers to that. He says, by one, Jesus is not referring to a paranormal transcendental state. He's referring to the joint mission that he and the Father had been cooperating on since his introduction by John the Baptist.
Got him.
God. It's so
this
frustrating.
This one I don't like. So this one's a metaphor.
Yeah, it's a metaphor that alludes to what? Because a metaphor is
hocus pocus.
It's like they don't want Jesus to say anything that made any sense. It's like they'll go out of their way. And when I say they, who I'm referring to are Christian pastors who want to defend their presupposition that Christianity is a right religion, the right religion, and that other religions are wrong. Mm-hmm. If you start with that presupposition, you will absolutely refuse to see the unity of life, because if you saw it, it would ruin your thing. And so it's like watching somebody try to shoot a gun at a target. This is what it's like reading these Christian authors. Watching somebody try to shoot a gun at the target, but they refuse to look into the sights. It's like they don't believe in the sights, and they refuse to look into them, but they desperately want to hit the target. Mm-hmm. And whenever they get right lined up with the target, their eye accidentally catches the sights, and so they wiggle the gun out of the way again. Even if they stumble into it,
like that,
they'll just throw it off because they're like, oh, I don't want to look in there. That's sinful. That's like a path to spiritual confusion. I'm going to get myself lost in these other religions. So they refuse to look at the unity of life. They'll go out of their way. And this book is supposed to be about unity. And so refusing to understand the unity of life while writing about this subject is just infuriating, because
I get you. Yeah.
But he offers some really powerful arguments about the kind of piercingly unconditional love that Jesus promoted and that the early church openly expressed, and how the political and religiously sectarian rulers of the time were frustrated by the fact that the gospel and the early Christian church was about taking care of each other and doing good and denying idols, because they're like, well, you're supposed to worship idols like political rulers or whatever mythological figures they've propped up, because that's what keeps order. That's what keeps us well behaved, is like lining up behind this idol or this ruler and all pledging allegiance to that. That's what keeps us in line. But you're refusing all idols. And Andy points out, I don't know if this is true, but he says this, and it's interesting. I didn't like double check it or anything, but he seems well read on church history, that as far as I think, and I'm not well read on it, so what does that mean? So he says that people would call the early Christians atheists because they didn't believe in gods. Now, whatever they said wasn't in English, so he's translating something, and it just it doesn't sit right. I'm like, I don't know if that's exactly what they said. But his point was that people didn't recognize monotheism as a new religion. They recognized it as a total abandonment of religion because they were so used to polytheistic worship. That's what he's saying about, like, it would be the pagans and Greeks. So anyway, they would be like, yeah, this atheist cult, these weirdos, they refuse our idols, but they're actually even better behaved citizens than us. So it just created this frustration that all these people did was embrace love, take care of each other, and refuse idols. You know, it gave the superstitious and the religiously sectarian and the those who worshipped politics and political figures something to just bang their head up against that they couldn't really do anything about. And he's making the point that counterintuitive, impossible way of living that was demonstrated by Jesus and then carried forward by his followers in the early church is why the church has blown up the way that it has, impossibly, against all odds, even more so when it's persecuted, and that doing more of that is the answer today. And that if you ever feel that there are two groups of people that are in an argument and you're taking one side or the other, you're more focused on trying to win than trying to love. And the kind of sacrificial love that Jesus offered was about losing on purpose in such a way that it lifted up everybody. So Jesus is like, oh yeah, I'm just going to let you guys murder me. So by human standards, especially the human standards of the time, that was an L. It was like, he's supposed to be the Lord and he got killed. Like, he lost. And then it turned out that he lost. It's like, he's not flying, he's falling with style, right? He's not winning, he's losing for a reason. And Andy Stanley is trying to make the argument that that's the kind of Christianity that we need to see today. And I think that's a good argument. And I'll read my favorite quote making this argument before I make fun of this argument. So this is on a serious note, by the way. So one of the gymnasts who was sexually assaulted a few years ago, you remember that deal?
Yeah, Larry Nasser. That was his name, the guy.
Right. So this girl
was not sexually assaulted. He was the one that did it.
He was the bad guy.
Yeah.
And good guy is Rachel Den Hollander. So she was the first to make an accusation, which is very brave. And then she was the last to speak in court. And she said, okay, I'm just going to read this whole page. In 2018, a Michigan court found Nasser guilty on charges of child porn sexual assault. Den Hollander was the first to accuse Nasser and the last of over 150 victims to confront Nasser in the courtroom during the sentencing phase. Whoa. 150, bro.
Whoa.
When her turn finally came, she addressed her initial remarks to the men and women in the courtroom. How much is a little girl worth? She asked. Den Hollander's question hung in the air. Referring to the other women who came forward with their own horrific stories, she continued, I submit to you that these children are worth everything. Then Den Hollander addressed Nasser directly. In our early hearings, you brought your Bible into the courtroom, and you have spoken of praying for forgiveness. And so it is on that basis that I appeal to you. If you have read the Bible you carry, you know the definition of sacrificial love portrayed is of God himself loving so sacrificially that he gave up everything to pay a penalty for sin he did not commit. By his grace, I too choose to love this way. Should you ever reach the point of truly facing what you have done, the guilt will be crushing. And that is what makes the gospel of Christ so sweet. Because it extends grace and hope and mercy where none should be found, and it will be there for you. I pray you experience the soul-crushing weight of guilt so you may someday experience true repentance and true forgiveness from God, which you need far more than forgiveness from me, though I extend that to you as well.
Wow.
What the fuck, dude?
What a big thing to say.
What the fuck?
Amazing.
So that was the most, like, effective way that his point was made. It's like people prop each other up as enemies, and the Christian way of loving is that even if there is a very valid reason to consider somebody an enemy, you invite them into harmony with life, with God, with other people, by being honest and accountable, not by being honest and holding others accountable as well. And so it's like, if this lady can love somebody who she has every reason to see as an enemy in that way, how can we not love somebody who we disagree with politically? Like, what are we doing here? But the fact that this is obviously nowhere, this is not even about that situation. So I'm not saying but at any of that. All of that is just what it is. Andy wants to make the argument that we should view ourselves as having a responsibility, ourselves as people, especially, I guess, if you call yourself a Christ follower, to uphold harmony over everything else. But there is still this thorn in his thinking that says there's not this transcendent state of harmony that pervades all of being. And it's not like there's multiple ways to God. It's about the Christian mission. It's about the Son of God. And it's still like, it just makes it frustrating to read, because it's just like reading something that's almost true.
Right.
And just so frustratingly close.
Right. You feel like he could be saying something so much bigger that's like truer on such a higher level.
Right.
Yeah. I get you.
And he doesn't address liberalism and conservatism specifically. So he doesn't say like, hey, conservatives, your values are this and this and this, and that's a good thing. But the liberal values are this and this and this, and that's also a good thing. So I'm just saying he doesn't say anything specific about either ideological or philosophical or political party, but he also doesn't stay out of the weeds of addressing them either. Mm-hmm. So he's in this weird in-between where he's clearly more salty, and I use that word intentionally. His tone is resentful, irritated, and salty and defensive, and reactionary throughout the book. Mm-hmm. And so he's clearly even more irritated at conservative Christians. But so like Jonathan Haidt, right? What he did as a liberal atheist moral psychologist was something that I felt was far more Christ-like, which was to really honestly study and seek to understand each party, what makes them tick and what their values are. Mm-hmm. And then clearly show through that work how they are both necessary and how they secretly complement each other. And that kind of thinking about the moral psychology of each political party promotes a unity mindset, a harmonious mindset, a love-grounded mindset, because you go, oh, they're two halves of a single thing. Mm-hmm. They're in love. They're in love. Like, even when they are bashing each other and saying, like, my extremism is justified because finger point, it's like, oh, shut up. You're in love. The fact that they are extreme justifies you being extreme. So you're playing this game and you're helping each other play this game. Mm-hmm. So each of your moral standard is the other. So in a sense, you're idolizing each other, and you're both allowing yourself to play this game that gives you this self-justification, this self-satisfaction.
Sure.
Give me a break. You love it. You both love this game.
Right.
And you can, this is a side note just because I'm getting into this way of thinking, but you can see the same thing if you see like cops and robbers really going at it. It's like, shut up, man. You guys love this game.
I was thinking of like Bloods and Crips.
Right.
Opposing gangs.
Right, exactly. And now Bloods and Crips are both getting over that whole dichotomy. And now it's like, hey, real recognize real. Like, if you put in work and we put in work, like, if you put in work trying to kill my friends and I put in work trying to kill your friends, we're both real? Like, wait, what? It's like, yeah, man. I mean, basically, when they both got tired of playing the game, they're gradually stopping the game. Like, gang violence is decreasing. And more when you talk with gangsters, they're like, I don't really care, man, where you banged or whatever. Like, sincere people are sincere people, and we all came from the same struggle. And but yeah, even if they are actively opposed to each other, there is something secretly enjoyable about opposition and warfare and all of that. And I got that. And when you think about duality and opposition and warfare that way, you can see how the love of God is secretly omnipresent. And when you understand that the love of God is secretly omnipresent in all things, that's a way of awakening to the eternal goodness of reality and falling in love with life and ending opposition and warfare, because you realize that the whole thing is just a confused and illusory expression of love. And if you realize that, then you can just express love as love. Like, if a kid could understand that they act out at school just to get love, if they fully made that realization, then they could just ask for love and express love and receive love instead of doing those behaviors, right? It's like same thing for grown-ups. And so I kind of felt like, since Andy had read Haidt, there was going to be something like that. Like, how does the love of Christ recognize that each of these parties have good qualities? He does touch on the fact that he mentions early on in the book that if you start to demonize a political party, you'll start by hating their faults, and both parties have faults and flaws and have things about them that are virtuous. You'll start by hating their faults, and you'll end by hating their virtues. You'll get to the point where even that which is virtuous about the political party you've demonized is evil. Like, if you told our dad, like, hey, but liberals, like, this is just scientifically based on studies. These studies are designed to account for blah, blah, blah. Liberals have a stronger intuitive sense of compassion than conservatives. Like, a liberal is going to be more likely to rescue a duck or whatever, right? Like, they're more compassionate people. That's a virtue. It's a genuine virtue. It's a Christian virtue. It is a Christian virtue, and they have it more than conservatives do. In that sense, they are more Christ-like than conservatives. He would say, well, yeah, but blah, 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 blah. It wouldn't be like, true, they're better at that, right?
Right.
Like, you remember when Trump and Clinton were asked to compliment each other?
Totally.
And that was like it was an edgy, challenging question. It wasn't like a question that everyone was like, yeah, that's a good one. It's like, ooh, never thought about that angle. Compliment each other. Like, that's how expected opposition is. But yeah, the book, to me, it just came off like we shouldn't engage in divided politics, because Christianity is not about winning. It is about conducting yourself in a manner that is best for everyone, because that's the kind of love that Jesus showed. And if we're not doing that, then we're not Christian. And if we are, and this is another core thesis of the book, I don't know if there was really one thesis. If there was, it might be this. Being Christian is more important than being in a political party. So you need to be a worshiper of the God that Christ revealed first. And if you are going to be a member of a political party, that needs to come second. Even your patriotism, like, patriotism should also transcend your political identity, but your worship of God should transcend that too. So, yeah, the thesis is muddy, though. The thesis of the book is like, Christ should come before your political affiliation. But it was so reactionary, and a lot of it, I don't know if he always uses this writing style, but a lot of it almost sounded like he voice to texted the book, like it was written like someone was speaking. So the way I'm speaking right now, if you typed it out, there would be fragmented sentences and run-on sentences and sentences with 6 commas in it, right? Like, this isn't correct grammar, but you can get what I'm communicating. If you're typing, there's a different way of putting sentences together. I think he didn't write it like he was typing. He almost wrote it like he was speaking, because he was just typing out a rant. That's how it came. He's just furiously typing off a rant that's like, hey, you Christians, like, he's trying to be like Paul rebuking a village. Like, hey, you get your act together. It's about love. It's not about being on a team. If you consider yourself on a team, then you're stupid. You're doing it wrong. And I'm reading it. I'm like, that's my whole problem with Christianity, and you're perpetuating that. So it's just, I feel like I'm watching him do that as he's calling that out.
Yeah.
But isn't that the way it goes when you look at society and you decide, oh, I am going to point a righteous finger at this, and you just end up with this other righteous finger pointed at the back of your head?
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
And so, fuck, I'm probably bringing bad karma on myself by making fun of this book too. But, yeah, Andy.
Not if you say that you might. No, you undid all of it.
Yeah, no, yeah. So I acknowledged it. Yeah, dude. I mean, there was a lot of stuff in here that I didn't give enough, that I'm not doing justice to this book, because I'm kind of having a reaction to the reactionary tone in the book.
Sure.
It was a bore to read. Like, around like the 5th chapter, he said, at the end of the 5th chapter, he's like, and that's what hooked people on Jesus. Speaking of hooks, I got you for 5 chapters. Like, move on to the next. And I'm already sick of this book. And like, halfway through the 1st chapter, I was like, man, I do not want to read this. And then he threw out that line, and I was like, you cocky butthead. I don't even want to read this. Brent paid for this book, and I told him we could discuss it, so I'm finishing it. I don't really want to discuss it. And you freaking butthead. You go, oh, gotcha, and you're hooked on this book. I was like, oh, no, I'm not. No, I'm not, Andy. This wasn't a good idea. I think that multiple people in his life probably told him writing that book is a bad idea. And he probably said, nope, this is the right thing. This needs to be addressed.
Probably conservatives. Just because he's seeming more liberal in the book.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Sorry. I know that you're doing a bit, but I didn't laugh at the bit because it just triggered thoughts that I'm like, I wonder who would be more opposed to him writing this book. I would think.
I mean, probably literally conservatives would be more opposed to this. They would probably be like, hey, maybe you should wait a little longer before you go and do something like this.
Right.
More likely to be like, hey, why don't you think this through a little bit more before you release this?
Right.
Because this is a book and it could be a YouTube video or something that would be a format that makes more sense for something that is like immediate. Like, we need to discuss this now.
Right.
And isn't going to be relevant for too much longer if it is like mostly about COVID.
Yeah, because I think liberals are probably more down with the idea of just going on a reactionary rant, probably overall. Not that both parties obviously go on reactionary rants nonstop. But
sure.
I feel like liberals might be a little more like, yeah, dude, if that needs to be addressed, call them out.
Right.
Whereas conservatives might be more like cautious.
Yeah, they would speak more liberally and be like...
speak more liberally. Yeah. Yeah, they would be less conservative with their speech. Right.
Mm-hmm.
Think about the title of this book, Not in It to Win It, Why Choosing Sides Sidelines the Church. You would think that this book would be about how choosing any side in general... I'm looking at this through an esoterically oriented lens, but it's like... A book called that, How Choosing Sides Sidelines the Church, should be about how choosing sides in any duality draws reality away from the kind of unity, the kind of harmony, the kind of eternal, infinite love that we're all striving for. Like to say, for example, that being Christian is better than not being Christian.
Mm-hmm.
And, I don't know. That statement's tricky. I don't know. I don't even know if I support that statement or not. Being Christian is better than not being Christian. Are people really more likely to be like God if they identify as Christian than if they don't identify as Christian? If there was some way to take that metric?
That'd be very complicated. You have to consider every other religion or gradient of lack of religion.
Right.
And that'd be complicated math to do, but I certainly wouldn't.
I wouldn't put any money on it.
I wouldn't.
Christians are more Christ-like on average than the average person. And just if anyone listening to this is curious, I think that Jesus was the perfect human example of God. So I believe in being a Christ follower. But I'm just saying, I don't know if people who... There's a difference between being Christian and identifying as Christian. I don't think it means all that much if you say I'm a Christian. I don't think it means anything that I say I believe in being a Christ follower. It means something if you are actually more like Christ. But on average, are people who claim to be Christ followers more like Christ? I don't know. And so when Christians write books that are about why the church should promote harmony, it's like, why are you preaching something that is universally, practically good and true only to people who have this certain cultural identification? There's something about that seems divisive in itself. To say, shouldn't you announce to the world and make the argument that the core teachings of Jesus are for everyone, good for everyone, common sense to anyone who gives them a serious look, and the right way for anyone to live, and a source of inspiration for people of all political and religious affiliation, people of all languages and cultures? Shouldn't you want to share the fruit that is Jesus with everybody willing to take a taste, rather than saying, hey, for those of you who identify as such and such, I'm offering you this? That just seems so backwards to me. Mm-hmm. It's something that we do here at Eastlake. I work for Eastlake Church, and it's something that we do that I happen to disagree with. Not that anybody's going to find a church where they agree with everything that their church does, but one of the approaches to preaching that Brant uses here is there are universal ideas in the Christian belief system, ideas that are just good for everyone, but the church should not extend any judgment to people outside of it, meaning that that the group of people who identify as Christians should hold one another accountable to being Christ-like and should say, nope, that ain't it, and should kind of call each other out in a way that makes everybody better. Like, hey, we agreed to this contract. Remember, we all signed our name. We said we're going to try to be like this guy. That's not it. Oh, you got me. I'm not being it either. Okay. And iron is sharpening iron, and all that should happen within the community of people who call themselves Christians.
Sure.
But as a more universally oriented Christian, I feel that and also this is another idea that's held by the teaching pastor here at Brent, and that's really popular among Christian communities, the idea that there was a fundamental switch, a fundamental evolution or jump forward in natural law itself when Jesus came. I don't think Brent would say it that way, but it's like there was an old covenant and then there was a new covenant, right? So God had a certain agreement with everyone, and then the creator of the universe, God, updated that agreement, changed it, changed the contract with the arrival of Jesus. Whereas to me, it looks like people disconnected themselves from the eternal reality, the ultimate reality, God's reality, the source of natural law. And then God gradually lured everybody back towards reality with layers of revelation. And the laws that Jesus taught, being, in my opinion, perfect, are laws that have always been the case. Laws that apply to every living creature. Christian morality is the morality that is aligned with natural law itself. It's not like those laws didn't exist before, like in 500 AD, there was different natural law than there was in 500 BC. And did I say that right? 500 AD, 500 BC? Or did I say the same one twice?
I think you said both. I can't remember the order, but you did say both.
Yeah, it doesn't matter the order. So moral law is embedded in natural law. So natural law, right? There's physical laws in this universe, and there are physical laws in this universe that are unchanging because there is an objective reality to the universe, and there's an objective reality to the universe because there is a God of the universe. There's a single mind, a single consciousness that created order out of chaos, and we get to live in that order. And so that's why natural laws don't change. Yet we go from Newtonian physics to quantum mechanical physics to quantum field physics to this even more abstract thing now, unified field theory. So the same laws existed that whole time, right? But we slowly picked away at the laws until we got deeper and deeper. And now we have a better understanding of how the universe works, but it always worked that way. It's not like it started working that way when we found it. Similarly, there's Old Testament law. That's like Newtonian classical physics. And now there's Christian morality, which is like quantum mechanical physics. And then, in my opinion, like a unity-based, Gnostic, directly inspired way of living in union with God is the equivalent of the unified field level of physics. And Christians who are at the quantum mechanical level, who are at the canonical New Testament level of revelation, are saying, yeah, God like gave us a new set of instructions. It's like, you're saying that natural law itself changed. I don't think that the Christian pastors who see it that way would then say, yes, I am saying that the natural laws of the universe changed. I don't think that they would respond that way. But I think that's what the implication is. If you're saying that the creator of the universe, not the spirit of humanity, the creator of the entire universe, updated the old covenant to a new covenant. And I don't think that I think they would say, oh yeah, God did change from the old covenant to the new covenant, but the natural laws have always been the same. And I would say, okay, well then your theology is divorced from your view of the natural world.
Right.
And it's fundamentally incoherent and inconsistent.
Yeah. It completely separates like the natural world from God's system.
Yes.
Or something. Like it makes those separate.
Right.
And that's weird.
Right. So me as a more like mystically interested person attempting to follow Christ, I'm looking at what Christ teaches and I'm saying, okay, this guy understood the very source of natural law. This guy was the very source of natural law embodied in human form to reveal truth to us perfectly, which means that his laws apply to everybody that's alive, not to people within the circle of people who call themselves Christian. So the reason I just went on that whole tangent is to say that Andy Stanley considers Christian law to be a set of doctrines that apply to those who call themselves Christians. And therefore, he feels that what he should do as a Christian pastor is rant about how Christians aren't being Christ-like enough and demand that Christians uphold unity. Yet at the same time, he is divorcing the Christian community from those outside the Christian community by saying one set of law applies to one people and another set of laws apply to another people. And then, so my analysis of that is, you don't actually believe that Jesus was the creator of the universe embodied. You don't actually believe that. What you actually believe was that Jesus was a significant religious figure whom you and another couple billion people have chosen to follow, and that you hope that paradigm takes over the world. That's what you're actually implying. Do you get how I get there?
Not totally, no.
Because if you believed that Jesus was the creator of the universe in the flesh, you would believe that the laws that were spoken by Jesus apply to everyone. So then you would try to lovingly appeal to everybody in the world, whether they called themselves Christian or not, with the idea that they should seriously look at the commandments offered by Jesus because they're a source of joy and goodness and truth and love, and they'll make your life better. So it's not to say, hey, this was the creator of the universe, so you all must obey. But hey, this guy was the very spirit of the universe, and he said this and this, and I just want to offer this to everyone. Like, these are the natural laws that we all have to follow, whether we like it or not. If you judge, then you will be judged. That's a universal law. That doesn't apply to Christians.
Right. This is not something you sign up for.
It's not something you sign up for. It's something you were born into. You inherited natural law. Natural law births moral law. You inherited moral law. So if you love people like they're you'll have an easy time.
Right. And that's a law whether you agree to it or not. That's the law.
Right. So if you believe that Jesus was the very source of natural law embodied, then you would just try to make that argument to the planet, to all. It's Jesus is the Lord of all. He is not a religious or political figure. And this is something really weird that Andy says at one point. He says, Jesus is not a religious figure. He is a king. What he was trying to do was invite people who are very politically oriented to insert Jesus into the position of cornerstone in their political paradigm. He didn't literally mean that Jesus isn't a religious figure, but he did say Jesus is not a religious figure. Jesus is a king. So that's a stupid thing to say. But what he was trying to communicate was, if you're a person who like it could be a good thing to say to somebody who, for example, would say, I'm not religious, I don't have a religion, I have a relationship with God, and I'm a good conservative Republican. It'd be like, okay, Jesus isn't a religious figure. Jesus is a king. Jesus is the king of your politics. So that's if Jesus is the cornerstone of all of your paradigms, right? Your paradigm on your health, your paradigm on how you function in your family, your political paradigm, your view of your relationship to nature itself, your religious or spiritual paradigm. If Jesus is the cornerstone in all those areas, then you'll have this like perfect example of self-sacrificial love, truth, and grace driving you as the spirit, the intention that animates every area of your life. And that's a good thing. You should try to pray like Jesus, intend like Jesus, think like Jesus, speak like Jesus, conduct yourself like Jesus, all of that. So that's what he's trying to say. Make the gospel the cornerstone, the axiomatic presupposition of your political view. But he really fumbles the point by saying Jesus isn't a religious figure. And it's like, Jesus is a king, and Jesus is a religious figure, and Jesus is the revelation of natural law itself. It's not something that belongs to a certain community. You're putting Jesus into a box that prevents people from receiving the universality of what he was, what he offered, what he said, what he taught.
Yeah.
So again, now I've been on this tangent for like 15 minutes, but again, to tie it back, the reason I'm going on that whole tangent is to say, Andy, you're putting Jesus in a box by ranting at Christians for not being Christ-like enough, instead of offering what Jesus taught to the world in general, not as a responsibility, a burden to carry, but a gift, a new way of seeing life that will make everything easier and everything better. And instead he's saying, no, you have a responsibility to put Jesus first instead of, trying to win. So it's not in it to win it, the title of the book, right? But Andy's in it to win it because he wants to prop up Christianity as the thing instead of propping up the gospel, instead of propping up Jesus as the thing, instead of propping up God as the thing. He wants the church. That's what he's always talking about. The church to be the thing. Put the church first, not politics. What about putting God before the church? What about putting the creator of the universe before the institution that you created to hypothetically honor the creator of the universe? What about not being in it to win it in that sense? What about not choosing sides in that greater sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So when he says not in it to win it, he means that you should not be trying to get political victories.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. The title, not the best.
No. And I don't even think that's necessarily why choosing sidelines the church. I feel like the title could instead relate to, I don't know. He's just starting with he's starting with a paradigm that dooms him. So I don't, hey, it's not my book.
Yeah.
So.
But you liked his other book quite a bit.
Yeah, I liked Deep and Wide.
Deep and Wide. We did an episode on that. If you want to check that out.
And and Deep and Wide was about preaching in a manner that if half the people in the audience are Christians and half aren't Christians, everybody can take something away from it. Mm-hmm. And that's the kind of preaching that I'm promoting here in this rant against his rant.
Sure.
But in this book, he didn't do that. This book wasn't Deep and Wide. This book was a rant by a Christian to Christians.
Yeah.
So if you're not a Christian and you read this book, you're like, what are these people doing? Even when they're telling each other not to argue, they're arguing, right? What is going on here? And as soon as you draw a box around people, you're going to create conflict. You're going to. Mm-hmm. If you feel that Jesus was the very heart of humanity and the very heart of God, then that's not who versus, right? It's not versus anything. It's not versus anybody. Mm-hmm. Jesus isn't versus something. Mm-hmm. He is the embodiment of the Spirit that sustains and holds in harmony all opposing and diverse forces. To use Jungian terminology, you've got 12 archetypes running this universe and running every human psyche that have 12 different motivations and agendas and 12 different core personality functions. Mm-hmm. And the self, represented by Jesus in humanity, is the thing that created all 12 of those, holds all 12 of those in harmony, continuously sustains all 12 of those, and seeks to integrate all 12 of those into one form that is maximally beneficial to all 12, to cultivate a state in which all 12 are totally fulfilled and in cooperation with one another rather than opposition to one another. That's the self. Mm-hmm. He says Jesus is the archetype of the self. And so whatever it is in you that seeks to create harmony and unity is the Spirit of God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall inherit the kingdom. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall see God. But even if you say, hey, there's Christians and there's non-Christians. Christians live by the Gospels and non-Christians, fuck them. That's not in the Spirit of Christ, in my opinion.
Agreed. Yeah.
So, yeah, well, I don't think a negative episode has to be any longer than 50 minutes.
Okay.
Night school.
Night school.